Well, good morning, everybody. Pastor Steve here. Thank you for being with me today. I hope you had a good New Year's Day. And for those of you like me who enjoy watching football, hope you had a lot of fun as well. Well, today we are in the second chapter of the book of Esther in the Old Testament. And what I wrote at the top of my journal after reading this brief chapter is when God brings something good out of a horrible situation, out of horrible circumstances. Now let's just be real. Chapter 2 is not a love story, especially the way it begins. And in many ways, this is really it's a tough chapter. It's a difficult chapter to read and think about. The Persian king, Ahasuerus, better known by his Persian name Xerxes, needs a new wife and a new queen because he had banished his wife, his queen Vashti, because he had gotten mad at her because she had not obeyed him, as we talked about yesterday. And so the plan to find a new wife and a new queen was to gather the most beautiful women who were virgins from the various provinces of the Persian Empire. And that was done, and hundreds of women were gathered into what would be called a harem belonging to the king. This was compulsory. They would think of them as slaves. They had no choice in these matters. And they spent 1 year going through the beautification process that was common among the royalty of much of the ancient world. And there's literature and records to document, to back all of that up. And at the end of that 1 year of going through the beautification process, and also another reason for 1 year was to make sure none of them were pregnant, and so on. Then they would bring these women who were part of the harem to the king, one at a time, and they would spend the night with them. And the goal was that over time, he would find one that he really liked best and wanted to be his wife and the queen of the country. Now, I would call that a horrible situation. Here are these young virgin women, beautiful. They have no say in this. And they have to spend a night with this king. And when I say, and it talks about evening and the next morning, let your imagination run wild. Let's not try to, we like to sometimes spiritualize things and make it not, no, that's exactly what was happening. And he was going to find his wife that way. And Esther, who's a Jew, beautiful, she's one of the women in that harem. And she spends the night with the king. And he chooses her. Now, what about all the other women? Well, they were sent back to the harem, where they had to spend the rest of their lives. No one could marry them. They belonged to the king till the day they died. Many of them would never see the king again. Others, he would come and visit or bring them to his room every now and then when he wanted to spend the night with one of them. They were his concubines. Terrible situation for these women. And for Esther, we think about Esther and how she loved God and God used her and she became queen and she saved the Jewish people, and all of that is true. But put yourself in her place for a moment. Here's this young woman, and she has no say, no right of refusal, no choice in the matter whatsoever. And she spends a year being beautified, so to speak, being prepared. And she goes and she spends a night with this king. That's not a love story. That's abuse. There's so many things we could call that. It's horrible. But the king chooses her. And she becomes his wife, and she becomes queen, if you will. Now, another very brief story at the end of chapter 2 is Mordecai, who had raised her since her parents died, discovers a plot to assassinate the king, and he tells Esther, the new queen, who then tells the king, and the king has the plot investigated, discovers that it's true, and then has these two would-be assassins executed, and Mordecai and Esther are in good standing with the king because of this. Now, through all of this horrible reality, okay, God is working to put Esther and Mordecai to a lesser extent, but Esther in a place to save the people of Israel living in Persia. Now, I said this is not a traditional love story. It's not. Did the king ever love Esther? Maybe. Look at chapter 2, verse 17. It says, the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she found favor and kindness with him more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. So, did he have affection for her? Probably. She found favor with him. He chose her. But that first night, she was just another concubine he was checking out. Terrible situation for her. What do you do when you find yourself in a terrible situation you did not create? What do you do when you find yourself in a bad circumstance and it's not of your own making? Have you ever been there? And if not, you probably will be in the future. What do you do? Well, based on Esther and this story, I would suggest one is stay humble and do the best you can in the circumstances. And her humility is here in that she didn't try to do more. She maintained some humility and did the best that she could in her situation. And I think that's good advice for all of us. Secondly, we need to always keep in mind that God, who does not cause these bad circumstances, that in the midst of these hard situations, that God is always at work, and that God can use us in the midst of our hard situations. God can use us to do something good, to bring about something good. We need to always keep that in mind and be open to God using us. And then number 3, trust. I think we need to trust that God is going to give us favor when needed with those who can help us in those situations. God ended up causing the king to look on Esther with favor. And God can give us favor with people who can help us when we are in a bad situation. See, here's something I want you to understand. You and I, we are called to live for God. Listen, we are called to live for God where we are, not where we wish we were. We are called to live for God today, not just wait for tomorrow. And we are called to live for God where we are, whatever our circumstances, not simply live for God when we get to where we wish we were. That's one of the lessons of Esther. Terrible story, but important truth and help for us in the midst of it. Well, tomorrow we'll look at chapter 3, and I'll see you then.